Okay, I am now streaming, and I don't think anyone is watching yet, so I might give it a couple of minutes to let some people join, just in case there is anyone that's able to watch live. I will probably record this later, or rather, I guess it is recording. Um, and when I'm done, I will also upload the recording to YouTube, so people can watch it after the fact. Oh, I do have one person watching. Interesting. The stats on the Twitch dashboard say 0 people watching, but then someone in chat said that they're watching. So I guess I'm not being given an accurate description of who is around. My voice is quite low. Let's see. Let me try to increase the volume of my microphone. Oh, it's already pretty high up there. Let's see. I've got the input maxed out. Let me try looking at system preferences. No, system preferences, not system information. Let's see. Sound. Samsung. Oh, no, I can turn this up. Let me try. Okay, I turned it up to about, I don't know, 75, 80%. It can go a little bit higher, but I live in actually on a pretty noisy street, and it's pretty warm today, so I have the window open. I'm hoping not to pick up more background noise than necessary. But again, I can't hear myself in the same way that anyone else listening to the stream can, so this will probably have to do. You'll be definitely hearing some San Francisco streetcars going by outside, and probably some sirens as well, since that's pretty common for where I live. Okay, so wow, I've already got some people watching. I was not expecting it to be that quick. Yeah, exactly. You get to really experience what it's like to live in Silicon Valley. Just like if you want to come here to be an elite programmer, like the rest of the tech world, then this is what you have to deal with. Just the insanity of this city. So yeah, I for those that don't know, I recently was on a recording of this new podcast called Rustation Station, which, let me see, I think their website is just rustation-station.org. Yeah. So this is a podcast that was started by Ben Striegel and John, whose last name I do not know how to pronounce, even though I have actually watched a lot of John's streams, and I've been paying very close attention for him to ever introduce himself with his last name so that I can learn how to pronounce it. And I have never heard him say his own last name, including a talk where someone else introduced him who also didn't say his last name. So John, if you ever listen to this, please say your last name out loud so I know how to say it. But anyway, this is a really cool project that these guys started pretty recently. There was a podcast called New Rustation that was run by Chris Krycho a while back. And Chris Krycho ran his podcast for something like 4 years, close to 4 years. And his life is busy enough and things have moved on for him, so he does not want to continue that anymore. But these two fellows recognize that there is quite a demand in the Rust community for people that want to kind of read and listen to and watch Rust-related content. So they created this project, Rustation Station, which they describe as a community, a community project for creating podcast content. But basically the idea is that they will commit to doing a new episode once every 6 weeks when a new Rust release comes out. And they don't promise anything in between, although there may be some other episodes as time and interest allow. But also, if other people in the Rust community want to create an episode, they can submit the audio recording to these guys, and they will essentially release it as an episode of the podcast and sort of manage all of the hosting and the RSS and all of that aspect. So I really like this idea because I really like doing teaching in programming and sort of sharing what I'm doing, and just the sort of community and social aspect of open source development is one of the things I like about it. So as soon as I heard about this project, I contacted them and said that I would be interested in doing an episode for the podcast about Matrix and Ruma. And Ben replied very quickly, and we got something set up. So this past weekend, I recorded what ended up being essentially an interview with me that he did, and it's about an hour long. I have no idea when it's going to get released, because they apparently have like another dude who does the like audio editing for them, and John, who is the one that actually hosts the website and I think like the files and kind of does the sort of infrastructure part of this. I believe I saw him say in a channel that he has just gone on vacation. So I don't know how long he's going to be gone, and whether anyone else has access to this infrastructure while he's gone. But I'm guessing it's probably going to be a few weeks until my episode comes up. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is, one, just because I think it's really cool, and I'm excited to see this podcast get started, and also, of course, that anyone who's listening to this stream right now already knows what Matrix and Ruma are and is interested in that. So chances are it's going to be up your alley. But also it kind of is related to why I'm streaming right now, in the sense that I wanted to make sure I had the right equipment to be able to record a podcast with these guys. So I did a little bit of research about like what's a good podcasting microphone and like what setup do people use for this kind of stuff. And I ended up getting a USB microphone called the Samson Q2U, which is this guy. Let's see, did I get this recording and podcasting pack? I'm not totally sure if I got this or what's going on here. Why is this not loading? Let's just look at oh, I see. No HTTPS. Good job, Samson. Yeah, so that's my microphone, and it comes with this funny little stand right here, which is kind of ridiculous because the microphone itself is heavy enough that this stand cannot support it if you tilt it down even slightly. So it will stay in that position that it's shown in the picture right there, but if I start to angle it down towards my mouth, it immediately falls over. And I was like, okay, that's not going to work. So then I also got a microphone boom arm, which I guess like a lot of gaming streamers use to sort of like hover the mic near their mouth without having to touch it or balance it on anything. And I got this podcasting, let's see, what is it called? It's the Blue Technologies, I think, boom arm. I can't remember the name of it. Blue Compass, yeah. So I picked this one up because this is like a very popular sort of podcasting audio hardware company. And this one seemed to be very well reviewed, and most of the stuff I found said either get this one or get the Rode PSA-1, I think is the name of the other one. Yeah, PSA-1. So this is the other boom arm that seems to be most commonly sort of recommended for podcasting. So I got this one first because it kind of looked a little sleeker and it looked a little more configurable. And as it turns out, this thing is an absolute piece of junk. It's one of the very, very few things that I've ever had to return to Amazon because it just straight up didn't do the one thing it was supposed to do, which is hold a microphone in place. And I actually wrote a review of it because I was just so astonished that they could even sell this thing as like a production grade anything. It's just like, wow. So I returned that and I got this one instead. And this one is not great. It kind of has still a little bit of the problems that I had with the other one, which is that you can't like when it's really, really bent down, the springs are powerful enough that it sort of slowly expands on its own, and there's no way to like lock it into a position. So what I was trying to do is have it like bent pretty low so that it's kind of like right in front of my mouth, but kind of coming in from an angle. But if I bend it down in that way, it slowly raises above my head as if I'm not like holding onto it. So this one I could get into a slightly better position than the other one, but I guess I'm just like using these in a position that they're not designed to be used in. Which is just really frustrating, but I guess that's why I needed to do a test stream to see if I could actually get this in a place that was working. When I did the recording for the podcast, it wasn't such a big deal. I was able to basically just kind of hold it in a lower position because it didn't matter if it was blocking the screen. Whereas if I'm doing some live streaming, I have to actually be able to look at my screen to like do the programming that everyone is looking at. And so I can't have the microphone like floating in the middle of my screen. I actually do need it to be sort of above my head. So I guess anyone watching right now, yeah, and of course to type. So anyone watching right now will have to tell me if the audio quality is okay, whether I'm clear enough, um, and if not, I will have to figure out a way to tweak my setup. But anyway, so all of this background is because this podcast is a really cool idea. You'll want to check out the Ruma and Matrix episode as soon as it's available, and I will certainly tweet about that. And you can also just start following the RSS feed for this, and I think it's in like iTunes and Google Play and whatever all of the various podcasting sort of like, I don't know what you even call them, like podcast discovery tools or apps. I just always have used the like iOS built-in one, which I guess goes through like the Apple App Store. It's definitely on there now, so you can find it and subscribe now. You'll see when my episode comes out. But anyway, so in relation to the stream, the other reason that I decided to actually spend the money to buy like this microphone and this boom arm is that I was really interested in starting to do some streams of Ruma, of development on Ruma, and I was like, well, let me get something that will work for both this podcast interview and any sort of future contributions that I make to the Rustation Station podcast, and also get myself set up with something that I can really use to do some Ruma live streaming development. Let me switch back to the Ruma homepage, since you probably are at this point and get what Rustation Station is. So yeah, that's my other reason for having bought all this stuff, is that I've been watching a lot of John's live streams that he's done in Rust, and let me actually bring that up for anyone that has not seen it before. So this is his username, John Who, on GitHub. That's what he looks like. Let's see, how do I find his... I want to see his YouTube channel. See, he's got the same username on Twitter, and... Is this his YouTube channel? That looks like a different person. Let me see. John... Oh God, no! Oh, John G-J-E-N-G-S-E-T. Ah, there he is. So this is his YouTube channel. This guy is very, very both entertaining and educational to watch. He's done a bunch of live streams on development in Rust on sort of a variety of topics. This About the Channel thing is actually pretty good in terms of describing what he does. But if we just take a quick look at his videos, what he's trying to do is sort of show examples of Rust being used for sort of real world development, because a lot of the teaching materials out there are sort of like talking about Rust development either in the abstract or in very small toy examples. And I think there's, or at least apparently there is, still a lot of concern among people who are considering adopting Rust but have not yet. Like, how ready is this for mainstream use? Like, is it realistic that you can really choose Rust and build anything that you might want to build in a general purpose programming language? So he's been doing sort of these live streaming episodes where he actually builds something real, and you watch him work through the process. You can see they're actually pretty long. Like he's done. I think I watched the first part of this one, which is building an async Zookeeper client, and you can see this first part of it is almost 6 hours. So they're very dense. It's a big time investment if you're going to actually watch all of one of these. But the quality is extremely good. I'm very impressed with both his knowledge and his confidence in able to have people watching him while he's doing this stuff. Because like my fear, and part of why I'm doing this sort of short stream to practice, is that it's sort of like when you're doing a job interview where you get a coding exercise. Like, even if the exercise is super easy, once you know that people are watching you and like you're kind of on the spot, you tend to sort of like freeze up, and it makes it very hard to think and actually solve the problem. But that said, I have found that I think what he's doing is super, super valuable, both for the people who can sort of actually watch them in real time as he's doing them, which so far I have not done. I've only watched these recordings that he posts later. But I think it's really, really valuable and interesting to watch in terms of just like learning how to build something real in Rust, like, and all of these sort of like, what do you do when you get stuck sort of things that are very difficult for people to work through when they're on their own without sort of like either a lot of experience over time or something like this, where they get to see someone's thought process in real time and see like, okay, well, I can like Google for a specific error code, but if I don't get like if I don't have a very good understanding of like how this whole system works together, like how do I develop an intuition about solving these problems? So anyway, John is awesome. He's really good at doing this kind of stuff. I think yeah, someone mentioned in chat, and I also watched this one right here. Called The What and How of Futures and Async Await in Rust is super, super good. I think for anyone that has any sort of confusion about how the sort of the primitives and the larger ecosystem for async computation and async networking are work in Rust, and some degree of sort of the history of its development. This is a extremely thorough dive into explaining how all of it works, like what all of these high level constructs are, and how they sort of decompose into what's happening under the hood, why it needed to work this way for async to work in Rust, and sort of like what the timeline is, what to expect, and gives really some more context for what he's doing in these other streams where he's building async stuff. Also, this talk right here, Rust at Speed, building a fast concurrent database. He talks about some of the work that he's done in his PhD program at MIT, where he's building sort of this research database that is novel because it has essentially like a query cache that's built into the system, built into the database itself, rather than having the developer need sort of a caching layer for the database. Like you can imagine like putting something like Redis or Memcache or something in front of your database as part of an application architecture to make reads faster when you're doing a lot of reads of the same data. And his project is essentially an idea about what if you took that sort of caching intelligence as business logic and made it part of the database, so that the database itself caches queries as the writes happen. And so he does a very good talk that's sort of speaking to a technical audience who does not have a lot of experience or potentially no experience with Rust. So he's kind of talking again about the experience of building Rust, building something real with real practical applications in Rust, and sort of like what the experience has been for him, like what the it's a little bit of a sort of a sales pitch that anyone who is already using Rust has probably already been sold on, about here are the things that it gives you that either haven't existed before or have not existed in this combination under the umbrella of one language before. So if you were to pick any of these to get your feet wet with, I would highly recommend this Rust at Speed talk. And if you have a little bit more time and you have the interest for the level of detail, the What and How of Futures and Async Await in Rust. So anyway, thank you to John. He's been pretty inspirational to me in wanting to contribute this same sort of content to the Rust sort of community. So I'm hoping to, I don't think I will ever be as confident and as good as he is, or at least not anytime soon. But it does occur to me that, so Ruma, and I guess I should say this on the recording, just for people that find this on YouTube later, just a super, super quick overview of what Ruma is. Ruma is a Rust implementation of the Matrix protocol, Matrix being this thing, matrix.org. So this is an open source sort of API for communication, real-time communications. You can kind of think of it as doing for chat what email did for synchronous and as sort of out-of-band communications. So the idea that, like, if I am Jimmy at jimmyquadro.com, I can email Joe at joeschmo@gmail.com, and I don't have to know anything about what software he's using to read his email, and I don't have to know anything about what server-side software his email host is using, or anything like that, and I already know that we can interoperate with each other. This is basically the same idea. So it's like anyone can build a home server, which is sort of like the central data hub in Matrix. Everyone connects to a home server in the same way that when you have email, you have someone who's hosting your email, like you have a domain where email is received. Anyone can build a home server implementation, and those home servers can interoperate with each other. And anyone can build a client. So if you don't like the client that is provided by a closed communication protocol, like maybe Facebook chat is a good example, if you want to talk over Facebook chat or Facebook Messenger or whatever they call it, you have to use Facebook software. Like there's no open access to talking to people over their network. So the idea is give users back control of their real-time communications, give them ownership of their data, give them end-to-end encryption, like all of the things that you'd expect from sort of a modern chat platform, but not owned by a commercial entity, and giving that power back to the users. So I'm this is an issue that's very close to my heart as someone who cares a lot about privacy and to put it in sort of more political and economic terms, I believe pretty strongly in people having power over corporations having power, and this is, I think, the project in this domain that I think has the most success for really kind of fighting back against what we're seeing in the fragmenting of private communications across the internet. So I like Matrix. I'm also interested in Rust, and so Ruma is the fusing of the two. Ruma is my attempt to implement the Matrix protocol in the Rust programming language. So I started this project about, I guess, 3, maybe almost 4 years ago, and it's been very, very slow going for a number of reasons. One is because I am a very slow and careful type of developer. If we talk about like the triangle of sort of quality versus speed versus cost. When I'm working at a company, obviously I don't get to choose what those priorities are, but when I'm working on my own project, speed/fastness of delivery is not even on my radar at all. As a personal project, my goals here are to do it in as close to sort of an ideally perfect way as possible. I know that's not realistic for any sort of software, but I really want to do it like a way that feels good to me rather than having it be done sooner and in a less ideal way. So that's one of the reasons, is that I like to go sort of steady and carefully and try to build the best product possible, even if it takes a long time. The other reason that it's gone very, very slowly is that both Matrix and Rust are pretty new technologies. And so part of Ruma's function has been not only to hopefully eventually have this product that's actually useful to people, but also to be sort of a forcing function, or to sort of prove out these two new technologies and sort of find problems with them and help to hopefully sort of smooth out those edge cases about, okay, I really like these two things conceptually. Let me try to actually build something with them and see how realistic it is. And when I run into problems, I want to sort of send that feedback up the pipe and try to improve both Rust and Matrix for the better, so that the next person who comes along and tries to like implement the Matrix protocol will hopefully not run into all of the same sort of complications and points of confusion that I did. So you can check out the project status page here, which has a little bit of an overview of sort of like how far along we are and what the major blockers are. You can get a better idea of like what the project is by going to the projects page, which shows all of the individual applications and libraries that are sort of the components of the larger Ruma project. And then especially related to Matrix itself, we do have a documentation page that will ultimately have two categories. One is this introduction to Matrix, and the other one is the actual details of like how to run the Ruma home server. Because the home server is not in a realistically usable state at this point, this documentation does not exist. But I'm still really proud of the work that we did on the introduction to Matrix guide, because what this is essentially explaining what Matrix is without the assumption that the person who's reading this knows a lot about technology. So this is essentially trying to sell someone who does not know what Matrix is and never really thought about the fact that Facebook Messenger is forcing them into a closed ecosystem controlled by a company in order to chat with their friends, and say like, here's why you should care about this. So we've got an overview that kind of explains what Matrix is. We have like the quick sort of bullet points of features showing that like, yes, this does in fact do everything that all of your other chat apps do, and you're not like sacrificing like some feature by potentially using this instead. And then I also have the page called Why Matrix Matters that goes into a little bit of the sort of more social and political and sort of economic reasons why I personally think this is important, and kind of, again, sort of lays the argument for why you should care about this. So that's probably enough talking about Ruma itself. So this stream is probably going to be relatively light on actual programming, because as I mentioned earlier, I do not have the confidence in people watching me program at this point that John does. Although I actually have done this once or twice before. Let me see if I can find. So I'm signed into. Oh wait, I actually am signed into YouTube. I'm using a different Firefox profile for streaming, so I don't accidentally show you any of my private stuff. So let's see, developing. I did do. Yeah, there you go. So if you go to YouTube and you search for developing Ruma, you will actually find another live stream that I did a couple of years ago. I don't even remember what I was working on in this particular stream. I did actually a couple of live streams around that time. I didn't have like the great, cool podcasting streaming setup that I have now, so I think the audio quality is not quite as good. I remember in one of them I did kind of like an overview of the home server's architecture. In terms of like the actual Rust code, not like how the architecture of a Rust home or a Matrix home server. I don't remember if that's this one. I think the first one that I did, I failed to record on Twitch, so I wasn't able to upload it to YouTube. So this is the only one that actually made it up there. And this is essentially the extent of my experience in like recording myself talking about programming live. Years and years ago, I also did a few sort of programming screencasts that were prepared in advance. And in fact, if you really want to embarrass me, you can take a look at some of those other ones. Let's see. I assume they're still up. Jimmy Quadra screencasts. Oh yeah. So if you go to look at these are from like almost a decade ago, where I was still a relatively new programmer in terms of like experience in the industry, and made a few of these sort of Railscast style screencasts about some simple sort of Rails and jQuery stuff. They're a little. I watched one of them recently. It's a little bit cringy, but not terrible. So this you've now seen like the extent of all screencasting on programming I have ever done. But really, what I'm hoping to be able to do is do these on a pretty regular basis. I would ideally I would like it so that most, if not all, of the time I spend actually working on Ruma myself will be live streamed, because I feel like anytime I'm not doing that, it's kind of throwing away an educational opportunity that someone could potentially learn from later, or even just be entertained by. Like I'm definitely of the sort of the type of nerd that will actually watch this kind of stuff just for entertainment, even if it's stuff that I already know. Like to a certain extent, like that was the case with John's stream about futures. Like I knew most, if not all, of this information already, and so it was really just kind of like kind of an entertainment thing to be able to see sort of like how someone else explains it and their process. But it was by no means was I doing it to like learn how async and async await work. But anyway, so and the other reason that I want to ultimately do more live streaming of this stuff is that I think it could actually be beneficial to me in terms of like the same reasons that pair programming is beneficial. Like when I get stuck on something, if there are actually people watching this at the time that I'm doing it, which if today is any indication, that seems like actually a pretty good sign. Like if I were to start doing these regularly, I can imagine building up a little bit more of a follower base for this. But inevitably, there are a lot of people out there that are smarter than I am. And even if they're not necessarily smarter, they'll be able to see things in a way that I'm not seeing. And so when I get stuck on stuff, it'll be really helpful if people are watching and saying like, either just something as simple as, hey, idiot, you forgot a semicolon over here, to like, this is why you're getting this error that you've been banging your head against, or have you tried designing it in this different way? And so I'm really hoping that if I will be able to learn from people giving me feedback on what I'm doing and trying to treat it a little bit as sort of like a sort of a 21st century Twitch era version of pair programming. I mean, we'll have yet to see like how well that actually goes, whether I actually end up doing this often enough that that I kind of reach that goal. But that's at least sort of giving you some background on my motivation for what I was hoping to get out of this. So today I'm going to do, like I said, probably not a huge amount of actual programming. I can sort of use this as, since I did so much of this sort of intro talking about the background of what I'm doing here. I think the stream will have a good amount of content already for putting up on YouTube. But I do also want to do a little bit of actual programming and sort of work on sort of facing my fears and doing some programming in front of people. So what I'm going to do on this particular screencast or stream or whatever these things are called is I'm going to be merging two Ruma libraries into one repository. So if you haven't looked at the Ruma library ecosystem before, we have a few different components to it. It's not maybe as complicated as it might look at first when you go to the Ruma organization on GitHub and you scroll down and it's like, whoa, we've got quite a bit of stuff in here. But basically, most of this is in service to trying to abstract the sort of details of Matrix API endpoints from the actual implementation of the client and server. So the highest level programs here are Ruma, right here, which is the home server component. And then we have up here Ruma client, which is a client library that you can use to make requests to a home server. So this is what you would use as a Matrix developer if you're building either a graphical client or a bot or some sort of other software that integrates with the API. This is probably your place to start. And ultimately, Ruma client and Ruma will share some of the same types because ultimately they're implementing two different sides of the same API. Like Ruma client is making the requests and getting the responses. Ruma is receiving their requests and creating the responses. But that API contract is the same between the two of them. So most of these other libraries are sort of in service to creating that abstraction. So the lowest foundational library here is Ruma API, which is this one, and it's very, very simple. I'm actually gonna go ahead and document this so that we can take a look at what's actually in it. And it's pretty small, so it should build pretty fast. And I'll show you what it consists of. So basically, it's just it exports basically one trait, which is used by some of these other libraries that are sort of higher up in the stack. And then we have this other library called Ruma API macros, which is a procedural macro that will generate a whole bunch of this sort of boilerplate implementation code to actually create one of these endpoints. Because the Matrix API, the Matrix spec has a whole bunch of APIs, and writing a whole bunch of really, really long sort of implementation code for every single one of these would be really awful from a development perspective. So instead, we chose to create this procedural macro, which generates the code that does that instead, based on sort of these more succinct definitions of what an endpoint is. And Ruma API and Ruma API macros have both gone through quite a few revisions in terms of the design, and we're just on the verge of releasing a newly designed one. I'm also happy to say that the design has simplified significantly over time. So it's actually pretty easy to understand at this point. So you can see there's really just three types in this crate. Ruma API has a thing called endpoint, and this basically represents a pairing of a request type and a response type. And then it has this thing called metadata, which is just sort of this like struct that has some extra details that are needed in order to construct the implementations for these request response transformations. So the definition is a little bit long. I don't think it's super important for this live stream to understand what this is all doing. But basically the idea is like this crate just implements this endpoint trait, which everything else builds on. And then if I go over to Ruma API macros, I probably should have been doing this while I was talking. This is the macro, and this just exports a single procedural macro that can be used as like a bang style function that will generate an API endpoint structured around this endpoint trait. So we can actually go to docs.rs and look at Ruma client API. This will give us the most recently released version to crates.io. So what Ruma Client API is this is essentially the code that has been generated by Ruma macros for all of the APIs in the Matrix client server specification. And so those are namespaced under these two modules. Unversioned is just things, API endpoints in the Matrix spec that can't change between versions. So they're very, very simple and like basically the safest possible thing that they can expose that will never change as the spec evolves over time. And really that just is, all that does is like tell you what versions of Matrix a server supports. But most of the good stuff is under this R0 module. Oh, there we go. So Ruma API macros has finished documenting. So we can see it just gives us this macro, and it gives us sort of an example of how we use this declarative style to tell it what is the metadata for this particular endpoint, what are the fields that constitute the request type, what are the fields that constitute the response type, and then it'll generate all the good stuff for us. So that's what Ruma Client API is. You can see that under the R0 endpoint, and R0 you can see here refers to the versions of the spec that start with the number 0. This is like a roughly sort of semver-ish API scheme, but not exactly. But it is true that the first number, like the major version number, does indicate a breaking change. So at the point where there's ever an R1 version of this spec, that will be like not backwards compatible in a semver way with what's currently here. But anyway, so these modules sort of break up the various parts of the API into the categories based on what the endpoints are for. So we could just take a look at one of these, maybe just even the first one. So the first one is all about account management. So this is for creating a new account, changing your password, deactivating your account, that kind of stuff. Let's see, what's another possibly simpler one? Alias is a pretty simple one. So this is for creating a room alias in Matrix, which basically every room in Matrix gets sort of this opaque identifier that's just kind of like a random string of numbers and letters. But you can't expect people to actually remember that. You want them to be able to do something like join Ruma at matrix.org, not join blah, 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 at matrix.org. So that's what an alias is, and these are the APIs that like let you create an alias, saying like, here's a human readable name, and anyone who connects to this is actually connecting to this like room identifier behind the scenes. So we can see here what Ruma API macros generated for us, which is this endpoint type, which is actually going away in the latest version of Ruma API. But essentially, like in the older version, we had this endpoint that is actually just a unit struct. So endpoint itself doesn't do anything. It only exists to have these two associated types, request and response. And what we later realized is that it actually makes for a much nicer API at the site of usage if the endpoint trait is actually implemented on the request type itself, rather than having the request type be an associated type of this endpoint. So that's the major sort of change that's happening in the latest version. But anyway, we've got this kind of dummy endpoint that serves as the entry point for this, and then we have a request. So you can see that this is these are the two sort of values you need to create a request to this API endpoint. So you'll need to tell the server like what is the room that you're making an ID for, and what is the alias that you're creating, and then you send that to them, and then in response you get back in this case nothing, because it's essentially just like a 200 OK or something like that. But most of these responses will actually give you something useful. Like in the get version, you give it the name of the alias, and it will give you back the room ID that alias maps to, and a list of servers that know about that alias. So that's the basic idea here. And so what we're doing in this live stream is to collapse Ruma API macros, this crate, into the same repository as Ruma API, which is a pretty trivial thing to do. Like there's not going to be any hard thinking on this, and not any sort of like tough problem solving. The reason we're doing this is because there's kind of this annoying dependency between the two at the moment. Basically, like Ruma API macros has no reason to exist without Ruma API. So right now there's sort of a directional dependency between the two, in that Ruma API macros depends on Ruma API, but there isn't really a reason to use Ruma API without Ruma API macros. And more importantly, the code that Ruma API macros generates uses a whole bunch of third-party crates. So you can see in the dependencies for Ruma API macros, we are depending on the HTTP crate, on Certi JSON, on Certi URL encoded, on the URL crate. And then the problem is that when you use something like that, when you use this in Ruma client API, which is where this macro is actually consumed, all of those dependencies of Ruma API macros need to be manually included in this, in addition to just depending on Ruby API macros, because this is going to generate some code that refers to these and expects them to be in scope. And so what we want to do in this case is actually make that sort of an internal implementation detail via exports that are exposed via Ruma API. So I'll do a little bit of this. I'm not sure I'm necessarily going to do all of this on stream, but I'll at least get started on it just for a little bit of practice. So what we're going to use to do this, so I should also say that, so the idea is that we're going to have two Rust crates in the same repository, which works via a feature of Cargo called workspaces, which is not particularly new at this point, although it is new since I started Ruma. So if workspaces had existed at the time I started Ruma, it's entirely possible that all of these repositories might have actually just been one repository. And really the main reason I haven't done that haven't squashed them all at this point is just like, there hasn't been a strong need to. And also there is one tiny little sort of fiddly detail that I still prefer about having them separate, which is that on GitHub, when you go to the releases page, so you click on this release thing, this has sort of like a place where you can document what the major changes were when you release a new version based on like the tags in Git. And I like that I'm able to do like Git tags that are just the version number and don't have to specify like which of these sub projects within this repository it refers to, because then it's kind of annoying. Like if you do like a Git log on this one giant repository, you have things that are like 090-Ruma API, 090-Ruma client API, and like you have to kind of like visually filter these things to sort of find the history of the one project you're actually interested in at a given point in time, which I think is just kind of like an unfortunate way that this idea of like the workspace and the Git tagging based release system collides. And I kind of like the sort of like simpler release tagging system. So that's one of the reasons that I haven't been hugely motivated to combine these before. But I think it's worth it in this case to kind of reduce the what's necessary in using Ruma API macros, of not having to include all this extra stuff and making sure that it works even if you don't declare your dependencies in exactly the right way. So like I said, I have not used a workspace before, so I'm actually going to go to the Cargo documentation on crates.io and take a look at the specifics of what I need to write in my cargo.toml in order to do this. Let's see, it doesn't look like there's a page about workspaces specifically. So maybe it's just meant, oh, interesting. This got really revamped since the last time I looked at it. Last time I looked at it, this was just like one page in the same styling as the crates.io website, but it looks like they've got Gitbook going now. So it shows you how long it's been since I had to look at the Cargo documentation. And I'm not seeing anything specific to workspaces in the table of contents. So let's just scroll down into the sort of manifest format until we come to the workspace key. And maybe that will be enough. Aha! Workspace field optional. The workspace field can be used to configure the workspace that the package will be a member of. If not specified, this will be inferred as the first cargo.toml with a workspace upwards in the file system. So I think that means that, so let's go back to Ruma API, and I'll take a look at my cargo.toml. So I need to have a workspaces key here. Is it workspace or workspaces? Workspace individually. Oh, you know what? You know what would be probably even easier than this is just looking at another crate that I know does this. And one example of that would be Diesel, which I think is diesel-rs/diesel. Yeah, so you can see in Diesel they have Diesel, Diesel CLI, Diesel compile test. These are all subcrates that are all in the same repository. And if I look at the cargo.toml, sure enough, that very top key is workspace. Oh, interesting. So it looks like these are all going to have separate subdirectories, including the top level crate. That's a little bit odd. I thought you could actually have like a source directory at the top level. Maybe I'll give that a try before I do what Diesel is doing. So basically we have... So this is really just an array. And in here I have, I guess, Ruma API and Ruma API macros. And then... What happens if I just call this source? Will that work? Because I already have a source directory with all of the details. I guess that's going to mean that I have to put a cargo.toml in the source directory, which seems a little weird. Man, I wish I had another... I could think of off the top of my head another example of a crate that uses workspaces. I think maybe Surdy does. Let's try that. See if they use a source directory. Oh no, sure enough, this also has a subdirectory called Surdy. So it looks like I'm gonna have to, unless someone who's watching this knows a way to keep the source directory and the main crate at the top level. It looks like I'm gonna have to actually move the rename the source directory and put a cargo.toml in it. Yeah, so I guess I'm gonna have to do it that way. So Ruma API, and all of this stuff is gonna get moved. So let me actually quit Vim for a second. I'm going to make a new directory, two new directories called Ruma API, and actually I won't create the directory. I'm gonna copy the existing Ruma API macros. So let's just make that one, and then I'm going to git move the source directory into Ruma API. Why did it not like that? It needs a... Oh, right. Source, not slash. I want it to be source. Yeah, like that. So that does, I think, what I wanted. And what did I just do with that untracked file? That's... What is that? What in the world? I somehow... Oh, weird. I ran some command that I didn't mean to run. I don't know how I did that. What is in cargo.toml? Did I not change this? I did some sort of weird... Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. I accidentally saved cargo.toml as colon. That's amazing. I don't think I have ever done that. So that's a great example of the kind of like weird nervous thing that I'm probably going to do when I'm streaming that I have not otherwise ever done. So let's get rid of that file. We do not need that. And this is a pretty easy one because there's only one library file, so there's not a lot of files that needed to be moved. And then so for Ruma API macros, I'm going to move in my code directory. I have Ruma client. Ruma API macros, and I'm going to move that wholesale into I guess just this directory. No, that's not what I wanted. I want to remove. I want to move just the source directory, I think. So I want to do that. Whoops. I'm going to copy the source directory of Ruma API macros. Oops. Oh my god. As Ruma API macros. Does that work? Or do these all have source subdirectories? Oh, they do. So there's like a cargo.toml in all of these. So it really is just like a separate repository in a subfolder. I could have swore there was a slightly more intelligent way to do this, but maybe not. So maybe I actually do kind of want to do that. So let me Let me remove that again. We'll get rid of this. And why was that taking so long? I think I don't want to move my Git folder, or I don't want to move the entire Git history over. So what I'm actually going to do is, yeah, so the root one is pretty dumb. It doesn't know, all it knows how to do is just say like, there are multiple projects under my current directory. So I'm going to create Ruma API macros as a directory, and then I'm going to copy Ruma API macros, everything to Ruma API macros. And that will... Oh, I didn't like that. I guess I don't really need any... I guess I want the tests. I don't need the target directory. Whatever. I'll just copy this stuff. I can delete stuff later. Yeah, we don't need the target, so I didn't really need to do all that, and probably that's why this is taking so long, is because I'm now copying over a bunch of binary stuff in that target directory that I'm just going to remove. And in fact, I'm kind of amazed how long that's taking. So let me remove Ruma API macros test target. That was crazy. But I do want the tests, so let me copy Ruma API macros tests to Ruma API macros. Okay, so let's see what the layout is looking like now. Right. And I might as well cargo... I guess I don't really care right now. So my cargo.toml at the top level just needs this. And then this stuff is going to go into the new one that's going to live in Ruma API. Actually, almost all of this. So at Ruma API... there's going to be a new cargo.toml, which is basically everything that was originally in this one. So that all that's left over here is this. And then I think I have... Yeah, Ruma API macros still has its own cargo.toml. That's fine. And... let's see what happens now if I do cargo clean. Is that gonna... does that clean... So that cleaned that target directory, and Ruma API no longer has a target directory, and I think I already manually removed this one. So why is there a Ruma API macros.rs in Ruma API macros? What on earth is that? This must be something that I use for the tests. I don't remember why there's a top-level Rust file in that repository. That's very strange. Okay, so that seemed to work, though. And so the difference here, in addition to having them near each other, is that they also share a cargo.lock file, I believe. So if I run, like, cargo check here, I think this is going to create a cargo.lock file at the top level and a target directory at the top level, but not in either of the subcrate directories. Let's see what it does. I guess I should also be making sure I'm looking at chat, too, in case anyone's asking me questions. I guess I don't need to look at Surdy or Diesel anymore. Oh, interesting. They have a bunch of examples at separate crates here, too. And replace. I don't know what that does. Oh, I guess that's just saying, if you're working on it locally, use this local path instead of using the crates.io version. That seems like something we're probably going to want. Okay, so we have checked. Yep, sure enough, there's a cargo.lock. Does it say anything about the two... Let's see, what's at the bottom? Interesting. So it should have, like, an entry for Ruma API and an entry for Ruma... Yeah, there you go. So it's got Ruma API and Ruma API macros in the same cargo.lock now. And it created a target, and if I look at these two folders, Oh, interesting. Ruma API macros has a target folder now. Why did that get created? Or did I not remove that before? I thought I had removed this folder. RLS. Interesting. Oh, maybe that's... Oh, that must be because I opened it. I opened the cargo.lock file in Vim and RLS started. And I guess it uses a target subdirectory. The other thing I need to do is make sure that my gitignore file... yeah, I guess that's really all I need for gitignore. So this is still going to work in this case. So I guess I can commit this. Although, you know, I now also have the README issue. I wonder if and what about licenses and like all this extra metadata? Like, how do these other libraries deal with that? So they have just one license at the top level that I guess applies to all of these. And then each of them has their own README in it. I'm not exactly sure how I want to do this, whether I want to have the README at the top level be about Ruma API, or move what used to be Ruma API's README into its own crate directory. So if we go back to what it looks like currently, it's pretty minimal, but I don't want to really duplicate this information between the two. Maybe it's not that big a deal for a single sentence. So I'm going to have a README here and a README at Ruma API README. So I can probably get rid of this and this. I'll probably just leave that one sentence at the top level and then say this repository contains the crates Ruma API and Ruma API macros. The latter, let me do this on a separate line. The latter is a procedural, if I could spell that right, procedural macro that generates matrix endpoints built on Ruma API. It is re-exported from Ruma API. So as a developer, you only need to depend on Ruma API. I think that's pretty much it. And then, what did I do here? Yeah, there's my other one. This one, oh, wait a minute. I should have copied all of this over to the new one first. And don't really need to list docs there. The license I can probably get rid of. I don't know, man. Maybe this should be at the top level. I don't know. This is probably not very interesting for me to think about on stream. But I also have a README at Ruma API macros, so this does not need a separate license because it's all licensed based on the top level of the project. And it can have its own build. And maybe I want to mention here, Ruma API macros is re-exported from Ruma API, so you should depend on that in any code that uses Ruma API. Just in case someone, for some reason, navigates to this directly. And this, of course, is not actually true yet. It doesn't actually re-export it. That's part of what I'm doing here. But I think that's enough for... What am I missing here? That's enough for this commit. I think we're safe to move this forward. So this is merge Ruma API macros into the repository. So the next thing we want to do is, I think Ruma API itself... Whoops. Oh, right, I'm in the wrong location now. I need to be in Ruma API, and Ruma API itself does not actually have an integration test. Let's see, what is... let's just go... Ruma API lib. Does this have any tests in it? Yes, it does have a test where this stuff is actually manually implemented. So this is actually a good to show visually like what the purpose of Ruma API macros is if you look at this test module, all of this stuff, like starting from like this public module create right here, all of this boilerplate needs to be generated for every endpoint in the entire matrix specification, and we won't want to have to write this by hand. So that's what Ruma API macros is. It essentially expands to this from a much more succinct definition of like what the endpoint is. So here's just a very simple manual implementation of it, which was basically done because the macro was not present from this crate. But now that we have the macro here, we can actually move the test. Well, I guess what we really want to do is we want to oh man, it's gonna be hard enough to start all my paths with source. In Ruma API cargo.toml, in this one we actually want to depend on Ruma API macros, right? And maybe not any of this other. Oh, I guess we need. Well, let's see, what else do we need? Source lib. What types do we actually use inside this? So we do use HTTP. That is a direct dependency. We use Ruma identifiers? Where is that used? Oh, just as error conversion. That's unfortunate. So we do use Ruma identifiers. We do use SERDI, JSON, and URL encoded. And where is URL used? I'm not seeing that at all. Oh, it's a dev dependency, so that's in the test. So we can probably get rid of these two eventually, as well as this down here. That'll just become part of become part of the test that uses the macro. So all of these dependencies need to stay, but what we are going to do is we're going to add one more dependency, which is Ruma API macros, and that will be version, I guess, the same as this. But what is the current version of Ruma API macros? I'm just going to put a star for now, because it kind of doesn't matter. And then, actually, we also want this to be optional, so I'm going to put it down here because I kind of like the table format. Dependencies.Ruma API macros. Version is anything, and optional equals true. And then, let's see, under features, because we want to be able to turn off the macros aspect. If for some reason someone wants to depend on Ruma API for use in some other library, but doesn't need the macros, we want them to be able to build without it. So under the features section, we're going to have default features, or maybe it's just called default, I forget. The default is going to be Ruma API macros. So by default, if you don't specify anything when you're building this, it will build with Ruma API macros, but you can also pass, like, you know, cargo build no default features, and then it will build without Ruma API macros if that's what you want. So I think that's what we want here, and then I might need to do like some path dependency thing here, because otherwise this is going to depend on the version on crates.io and not the version in my repository. So I think that's what that replace tag was in Diesel. Where did I see that? Was it on the top level? Yeah, right here. So let me go back to the manifest format and see what replace is about. I remember there's also a key called patch, which works in a similar way, and I'm not sure what the difference between patch and replace is. Patch. The patch, replace, and profile sections in cargo.toml are recognized in the root crates manifest and ignored in member crates manifests. Okay, so that has to be at the top level. Patch. This section of cargo toml can be used to override dependencies with other copies. The syntax is similar to the dependencies section, right? But what's the purpose of it? The patch table is made of dependency-like subtables. Blah, 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 blah. What is the purpose of it, though? More information about overriding dependencies can be found in the overriding dependencies section. Okay, it looks like I'm probably going to want to look at that. And so in this case, patch is being... Oh, it is still patching out a specific dependency. Huh. Okay. Oh, I see. It's patching out a source rather than a particular library. So this is saying when you're getting stuff from crates.io, do these particular overrides. When you're getting dependencies from this particular Git repository, do these overrides. The replace section. This section of cargo.toml can be used to override dependencies with other copies. The syntax is similar to... So this looks... Each key in the replace table is a package ID specification, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this part is not particularly clear about what the difference between these two is. So it looks like I do actually want to look at this. And let me see, how is it written in Diesel again? So, oh, that's weird. Like, it has to, like, specify the version of the library? Like, don't I just want it to be... This is so strange. I don't know why I would want to specify the version of this. Like, all I want it to do is, like, when I'm working on it within the repository, use the path and not the... Not the crates.io version. Okay, I guess I need to look at this. What is this about? Specifying path dependencies. Overriding dependencies. There are a number of methods in Cargo to support overriding dependencies and otherwise controlling the dependency graph. These options are typically, though, only available at the workspace level. That's fine, because that's what we have. They aren't propagated through dependencies. In other words, applications have the ability to override dependencies, but libraries do not. But we are a library. The desire to override a dependency or otherwise alter some dependencies can arise through a number of scenarios. Most of them, however, boil down to the ability to work with a crate before it's been published to crates.io. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. A crate you're working on is also used in a much larger application you're working on. Upstream crate, blah, blah, blah. Okay. God. These scenarios are currently all solved with a patch manifestation. Historically, some of these scenarios have been solved with the replace section, but we'll document the patch section here. So it's actually saying that patch is what I want? I don't know. I am not finding this very well explained, or maybe it's just because I am trying not to sit here and like think in silence while on the stream about which of these I want. I think maybe for now I'll just do what Diesel does and trust that that is done in a way that makes sense. So let's go back to cargo.toml and then add our replace. And then what is the syntax for this again? So it's just the name of the dependency. So we want to replace Ruma API macros. And then this is going to be... I wonder, maybe I can use a star here. And then here I use the path Ruma API macros. Is it as simple as that? I have no idea what's happening here. Yeah, so someone says, as far as I know, patch is meant for doing a temporary patch on a crate until it is fixed. Okay, so replace does sound more like what I want in this case. Yeah, I'm still not clear why the version needs to be specified. That seems like just a thing that I could potentially screw up and forget to change as the version increases. I really want it to do it in all cases. So let's see how far that gets us here. Let me see. Let me just run cargo check and see what it does at this point. Fill to parse manifest. It did not like the top level cargo. Replacements must specify a valid Semver version to replace. Oh, that's so annoying. Okay, so Ruma API macros. What version of it am I actually on right now? It is version 060. So I guess I have to manually specify this? I don't understand why it makes you do that. That just seems like setting me up for getting to do this in the future. Oh, okay. Well, this looks like it's working now. It looks like it's building against the local version, which is in fact what I want. So assuming that this works, I guess the first thing to do here is just to re-export the macro. So this will be pub use Ruma API macros, Ruma API. Use of undeclared type or module. Is that a fact? I am pretty sure that... Ah, yeah, so it compiled the local version. That's what I wanted. Let me try that again. Why does it not like... Oh, no, that works. So what if I cargo doc this now? Is it going to know about Ruma API macros? Let's see, where did I open that documentation up? I guess I already closed it. So I gotta wait for this. Oh yeah, that's a good question. Can you not specify a version and replace? So what if I just give the name of the library without a version? Will it accept that? I'm guessing that this will not work based on the fact that that's kind of what star means, and it didn't like star. That certainly seems like something that it will complain about, but we'll give it a shot. Why is this taking so long to document? I thought I already ran the doc. Oh, it's because I deleted the target directory after I merged everything in, so it's got to regenerate all this nonsense. The one and major downside of a ahead of time compiled language, having to wait for all this stuff. But we're near the end now. Can always use a faster computer. Okay, let's open target doc Ruma API index. Ah, very good. So that seems to have successfully exported Ruma API. And maybe, I guess I'll also want to do inline documentation on this. So I think that's doc inline. Why is this complaining? I wonder if this is just RLS confusing itself. Let me try quitting Vim and restarting it. Source lib. See if it still complains about this one. And then let me run cargo doc again. Oh yeah. So replacements must specify a version. That's so annoying. What did I say? What was it? Now I've closed Vim, so I lost my undo buffer. I think it was 060. Let's try that again. Why does it need to redocument all that stuff? That's odd. Patches like replace, but better, says Jonas. Interesting. So maybe I should be using patch. And presumably neither patch nor replace affects what gets published to crates.io. So I don't have to worry about like accidentally publishing something that uses some internal pointing patch declaration. Maybe I'll do it like that. Anyway, it seems to be working, so I'll at least leave it for the moment. Well, it's basically if I run, if I'm building, why I'm trying to do this is maybe I'm overthinking it, but when I build Ruma API locally, I want the local Ruma API to depend on the local Ruma client or Ruma API macros rather than trying to pull the latest one off crates.io, which I think is what it will try to do unless I tell it to do that. I don't know. Is it smart enough to realize that I have a library called, let's see, because I have these two listed as members, and in the other cargo.toml, you can specify a path dependency and a version. Oh, well, that's even better. That is exactly what I want. So maybe that's even easier than this nonsense. Yeah. So let me go back to the cargo.toml for Ruma API. And so what you're saying is for Ruma API macros, I can specify a version which we'll say for now is 060. So again, I still have to remember to change this, but I suppose I have to do that for publishing's purposes anyway. So maybe this is not such a big deal that I have to... I guess the thing I'm worried about is that because it's building locally, am I going to forget that it won't build unless I update this? I don't know. I guess I'll cross that bridge when I get there. So we have also a path, which is up one directory at Ruma API macros. And so maybe now we can get rid of this replace. I'm just going to comment it out for a moment. And let's see if that works. It seems to have worked. So far, so good. The inline documentation doesn't look like it worked. Yes, I have Ruma API and Ruma API macros are both in subdirectories of the workspace. I was trying to find an example of a library that had a top-level crate and then a sort of a sub-crate in a workspace, but I looked at both Diesel and Serde, and they both have even the sort of top-level crate in a subdirectory, which seems, and based on the documentation for workspaces, it seems like that's the way it's intended to work. I could have sworn that I saw in the past. Oh, I wonder what happens if I just, in this, what if I just list dot as one of the members in the workspace? Will it know about... I guess that doesn't work because then I need to... There needs to be a separate cargo.toml for the individual library, so I'm not sure how you combine them. You need a dot member? You don't need a dot member, so I can just leave this off entirely and it knows that the top level... So that means that I can move... Oh, interesting. So all of that moving around nonsense that I did, I don't need to do. So Ruma... Okay, let me just quit all this shit. And let's move... What did I put under Ruma? Ruma API has the entire thing at this point. So maybe I will not even... I'll just overwrite that top-level README. I don't really need it. So let's git move the Ruma API README back to here. Destination exists. You can overwrite it. It's fine. And I'm going to move Ruma API source to here. And then I think I can just remove... I can remove Ruma API now. Oh, no, wait. I actually do... I still want to move those things back into the I want to merge those two cargo.tomls back into each other. So Ruma API cargo.toml. So I want to move all of this stuff back into here. And I apparently don't need the replace, and I don't need to list the top level as a workspace member. So I guess just that. Which would also mean that this does not need the to go up a directory. It's just the current subdirectory. Let's try that. What did I do wrong here? Yeah, that looks right. What happens if I cargo check this? Oh, that worked. So it looks like I don't need this. Git remove Ruma API, no longer need. So that seems to actually all work fine. This is much better than the nonsense I was doing before. So let's see if my inline doc is working again. Not even again, it wasn't working at all before. Yeah, why is that not documenting? I could have sworn that you could do like a doc inline to get the... Maybe it doesn't work on a re-export from another library? I'm confused about that. So if I click on this... Huh. I guess it doesn't really matter. I wanted there to be at least a description about what this is here, rather than just kind of listing it with no documenting text. I could have sworn that was done with doc inline. Is that not what that does? Yeah, let me try... well, let me open up... Well, I guess I'll just try it... try this as a dummy test to see if it even appears. See if you can even document re-exports at all. I could have sworn that you could. Maybe what I have to do is like import it as a submodule in the library and then re-export it from Ruma API. Yeah, that didn't appear either. What's up with that? Am I smoking crack that like this is not something you can do? I think maybe it only works if you're re-exporting something from a submodule of your own crate to the top level, but not if you're re-exporting types from another crate. I'm trying to think of another library that does this. I think maybe Hyper does. Does Hyper have a re-export of Tokyo? Oh yeah, look at that. So this has re-exports even of stuff inside itself that has no documentation. That's strange. I could have sworn there was a way to do this. Well, that's really unfortunate. I would like to have some sort of documentation on the top level page that explains what this is so you don't have to click through it. Because that is useful for the same reason that these things are useful. Like, you want a quick overview without having to click through to every individual thing to see what it is. Yeah, I'm totally... I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone right now that as to whether or not you can have documentation on a re-export. I could have sworn I'd seen it before, but maybe you can't. Oh well, I guess I can always add it in later. So I guess for the meantime... Yeah, very strange. Well, at least it's working. So then the other thing we want to do is... we want to take all of those dependencies that Ruma API macros refers to in its generated code and move those into Ruma API. Or rather re-export them in a hidden place, I guess. Because Ruma API... Oh, I guess Ruma API macros doesn't depend on those things, but maybe it should. Oh yeah, let's see. So here's a link that Jonas has sent me. How do I move this to the other window? Copy link location. Doc inline. These attributes are used on use statements and control where the documentation shows up. For example, consider this Rust code. Yeah, so there it's being used on a re-export. The documentation will generate a re-export section and say pub use bar, where bar is linked to its page. If we change the use line like this, instead bar will appear in a structs section, just like bar was defined at the top level. I guess the difference here is because the actual definition, like, sort of like these two locations in my particular case are actually across crate boundaries. So I can't tell it to not document it in the other place and only document it in line because I can't control the way the other crate documents it. But it seems like I would want it to appear in both places, really. One special case, in Rust 2018 and later, if you pub use one of your dependencies, Rustdoc will not eagerly inline it as a module unless you add doc inline. But I did add doc. Oh, there's even a typo right there. That's a squiggly brace. That makes no friggin' sense to me. Because this seems to be saying specifically right here, that you want to document it in line. Huh. I don't know, man. Makes no sense. Oh, you know what I should do before I start moving dependencies over is to maybe commit this. So what did I actually change here again? I moved... I might actually squash this into the previous commit because I just moved things away and then moved them back, which was kind of creates a bunch of unnecessary diff. So let me do, is it amend? Yeah, merge and re-export Ruma APIs. I don't even need to mention this, really. I think it's pretty clear what the merge means. Okay, so, yep, now I'm ahead by... So I've squashed that all into one commit, and now I want to see about moving dependencies over. So now this is interesting, because we're actually doing two things here. So in the current version of Ruma API macros... Oh, did I not remove the Ruma API folder? I think I can get rid of this now, can I? Yeah. Ruma API. And that didn't change my... my Git index. So in Ruma API macros, we currently don't have... I guess I want to look at the test. Oh, I don't... Why do I not have a test? What in the hell? Is this top-level file somehow being used as a test? I don't remember how I did this at all. That's so strange. I mean, this is clearly a test, but, like, how is this getting loaded? What in the world? Very strange. What is in my Travis? How is it testing this? Cargo test. Oh, maybe there's a test module inside source lib? What in the hell? Yeah, you know what I probably did? I probably accidentally deleted the tests folder when I was copying this over from my Ruma API macros checkout. Make the font a little bigger. So if I go to Ruma API macros, what did I do here? Oh yeah, so there is a tests folder. Oh, and that's where that is. So it looks like I just did some moving between directories and accidentally moved things in the wrong place. So what we actually want is a Ruma API macros tests directory. And then we want to git move Ruma API macros blah, blah, blah into... That's what it was supposed to be. And I'm just going to amend that again because it's just a silly mistake that does not bias anything. So now if I run... Let me just run cargo test in the background here to see if things still work in their current incarnation while I'm talking about this. So as I mentioned before, in Ruma API macros... Oh god, I'm so used to typing source at the beginning of things. That's going to be really annoying. In this guy, we generate... I guess this isn't really shown in one place, but I guess it's kind of in the mod section is where we actually do the generation. Yeah, there's 2 tokens way down at the bottom here. Where does it start? Yeah, right about here is where the... This is like the start of the code that gets generated. Oh, by the way, I just remembered at the beginning of the stream I was mentioning that the street that I live on is super busy, and I realized I have not been paying attention to that. So if anyone who's listening would like to let me know whether or not you've been able to hear things outside my window, or essentially how well this microphone is isolating my voice from the noise outside, I'd be really curious to know that. Whether or not I need to, like, either close the window or, like, I don't know, invest in some sort of soundproofing to do this stuff to get clearer audio. Because I don't want people to miss things that I'm saying that might be useful to them if if it's noisy. I haven't been totally paying attention. I'm so used to the noise outside that like I don't really notice necessarily when it's happening if I'm thinking about something else. But I can imagine that for people listening, like they would very clearly notice it. I don't think there's a siren that's there hasn't been like an ambulance that went by since I've been streaming. I don't think, but there have been definitely some pretty loud cars. Anyway, okay, so mic quality seems to be good. It is being reported, so that's great news. I'm happy about this. Someone says we can hear things every now and then, like we heard whatever went past just before I said that, which is of course what reminded me. Don't personally mind it much. Never thought it was loud enough to get in the way of your voice. Okay, that's important. That's useful. I mean, like ideally it would be quieter, but as long as you can understand what I'm saying, I guess that's really all that's important. Until I move to a quieter neighborhood one day, in which case this will all get better for everyone. So anyway, let's see. Ruma API endpoint. So this is everything inside the brace starting on line 320, like from this line on, is the code that will appear as generated code when the Ruma API macro gets called. So you can see that this is like actually using stuff from Ruma API inside it. And so what we need to do is, I think, find everything that is being used by this macro that's in an external crate, and re-export that from a hidden module inside the inside Ruma API. Is that right? Or does it need to be in Ruma API macros? I gotta think of it. Okay, let's see. I want to use the indirect deps branch. Oh, interesting. Let me go take a look at this other branch that that Jonas worked on earlier. Is that in Ruma API macros? Yeah, indirect deps. Ah, he already did most of the work. Does this have a pull request associated with it? Oh, well, great. So maybe I've just been redoing a bunch of stuff that he already did. Let's see, what changed here? Ah, sure enough, there's there's a get dependency, macro export. Right. So this is all. I think for the sake of doing this on the stream, I'm gonna just redo this work because it's kind of like there won't be much point to it if I just import work that someone else did. It is a little bit of duplication, but again, like part of the point of this is like showing the work I'm doing. But maybe I will refer to this as a guide. So you can see that Jonas already got started on doing what I'm already doing here. And you can see that, like, here's an example. So where we were previously referring to URL, the crate URL, as like a top-level dependency, it is now actually inside sort of this hidden module called export inside Ruma API, where we can use it because we know about it, and technically other people could also import from this. But if we just put a doc hidden attribute on it and declare that we do not intend for external consumers of this library to treat this as public API, like technically it's sort of a breaking change, but it seems to be a pretty common practice that anything that has its documentation hidden is considered private API. Kind of what we really want is something more akin to like the pub crate sort of scoping rules, like how you can do, you can say that a type is public to only your crate by doing this. What I really want to say is like actually delegate this between two crates. So I want to say like this is public to my crate and also like a crate that I designate. That would be really like a more ideal way to do this. But that's all good. So basically what I need to do is look for any place where we've got a double colons pretty much. Or I guess what I want is, let's see, is it \b? I don't know how to do this in Vim regex, but like looking for things where like a word boundary followed by, I guess this will work fine. Yeah, pub crate is really cool. And it's not just pub crate, because you can also do this syntax where you put something in here. It's actually not just crate. Crate is just like one of the sort of, it's the most common, I think, because this basically means everything else in my entire crate can use this, but no one outside of the crate can use this. So it's a way you can kind of get around like the visibility scoping rules that would otherwise make you have to nest your types in kind of an annoying hierarchy just to be able to share things internal to the crate. But you can also put other paths in here. So you can do pub self or pub super or pub in foo bar baz. This in here is used to distinguish the syntax here, because you can also do something like this, and this could potentially be like, as far like you could do struct foo, or let's see how to, I forget what the exact syntax is, but essentially it needs to be able to disambiguate between like whether this is a unit type or like a tuple type, or whether this is referring to like a visibility modifier. So if you give it like an arbitrary path in here, you have to add this in keyword right before it. But if you're using one of the other Rust keywords, then you can just do that directly like that. So yeah, that's very handy. Okay, so let's go back to where that quote starts. Where's the first place where we start something with, oh, wait a minute. Oh, actually, it's in a lot of these. Because a lot of this, so you can see like all of this crap up here is like building up little pieces of the macro that's eventually going to be generated. So by the time we get down to this, the very last thing that we construct in this function is this single call to the quote macro, which generates like a stream of tokens to be used as the API endpoint. But some of this stuff, like this right here, request types, is actually interpolating another token stream that we generated higher up in the function. So these are all interpolations of this stuff. And some of these will refer to these crates also. So this is the work that Jonas already did, but just for the sake of anyone watching this, either now or in its recorded future, I'm going to go through and just do this manually. So here's the first example in our final generated code where we're currently exporting from the URL crate, but what we actually want to do now is do Ruma API exports URL. And I'm going to have to go back and actually export these things, but let's just do this now. So really what I want to do is Ruma API exports, if I could type correctly. Okay, so I want to find all of these places where we're currently using like a double colon scoping, referencing a top-level crate that is expected to be in scope to depend on the version of it that we will export from Ruma API's exports module. Oop, I went too far. But there's one, and there's one. There should be probably not too many of these. This is not... if I was better at Vim, I could probably do this entire thing with a fancy like search and replace. But it's pretty rare that I actually do this kind of thing, so it's just not something I ever learned to do quickly in Vim. If there were like thousands of these that I would need to search and replace, then I would probably spend the time to go learn a smarter way to do this. But right now I'm just using the period keyword to repeat the last input that I made. On that one I don't need to import because that's already from Ruma API. Oh, I actually wasn't looking very carefully if I was accidentally... All right, No Troop, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your participation. Hopefully I'll have more of these. Okay, so yeah, hopefully I haven't re-exported anything that was actually from Ruma events, which I didn't notice. Standard, I think, is not going to be exported, so I can refer to that as a crate name. That's safe enough to... Oops. To just refer to... That's Ruma API. We don't need the double quotes anymore. Oops. What did I just do? Yeah. Don't need the double colon anymore there. Here I do need... Oh, man. So here I need Ruma API exports. Where do exports go? I want it there. And here, I do not need those anymore. I want it... What? It didn't like that? Ruma API exports. Uh-huh. Here again, don't need that. That should be fine. Here we need it. What am I doing wrong here? Ruma API exports. Why did my repeat stop working? I guess maybe it's because I deleted some stuff. Put that on the exports. I'm going to skip that and search for its standard specifically later, because I think that's clobbering my dot operator, and I am again failing to use Vim's yank registers correctly, even though I actually just learned about this the other day, because the way it works in Vim is if you cut something, it's conceptually the same as deleting something. So if I delete something, it like puts it into the same register that if I then if I do something and I want to delete something, but I don't want it to override my copy register, then I have to like explicitly put into a different register. And I have like so rarely needed to do that I have not committed doing it to memory. But I was actually just watching a screencast on how to do that the other day, and unfortunately did not stick with me. So I would need to look it up again. Looks like there's another example of... I guess I'll just delete this. What the hell? That one's good. Yeah. So so the I'm using the period operator to repeat this, and what's happening is as soon as I do that delete of those two individual semicolons, then it clobbers my repeat operator. So the next time I do repeat, instead of repeating that, it repeats the removal of the delete, which is not what I want. So if I was better at Vim, I would not be failing at that. Yes, let me skip that again for now. Oh, wait, there's one I want. So I'm going to do it there. I've been learning Emacs and Evil Mode, so I feel even slightly... Yeah, I have never used Emacs, so I have no particular strong feelings in the editor war debate. Vim has worked pretty well for me over the last 5 years that I've been using it. I would say I'm probably not even considered an intermediate user. I probably somewhere between sort of rudimentary and intermediate, but it's definitely I'm definitely at the speed now where it doesn't feel like it gets in my way like it does when I was first learning it, where like every little thing I want to do, I'm like, oh god, what is the keystroke for this? Like more or less, it's all fine. It's just once in a while I have to do something that I can see would be useful, but I don't do often enough to have committed to muscle memory. So I'm gonna, you know what? No, screw it. I'm gonna just do it all in one pass, because hey Kyle, yeah, I did not realize that you were an Emacs user. Although I guess at the time that we worked together, I did not even use Vim, so it's probably not something I would have even noticed. Okay, Ruma API exports. Oh my god, that's so annoying. I want exports. Yes, that guy. What else? Another one where we can just delete these guys. This one I want... god. Ruma API exports. You know, maybe I should actually just go look at this right now, because I am doing anyone watching this a disservice by not just learning the way to do this in Vim. So what is it? Vim registers? Where is there's like a Vim wiki. Vimcasts. If anyone is learning Vim and is not aware of this this website, vimcasts.org, I recommend checking it out. It's pretty awesome. I don't think it's been updated in a long time, but it's got a pretty good backlog of like Vim related sort of topics in relatively bite-sized chunks. Why is this taking so long to respond? Let me open up the wiki in the meantime. And yeah, he's got some really good stuff, and also a really, really pleasant voice to listen to. So I will admit that there's been a few times when I was like wanting to relax, and I was like, I actually just want to listen to this guy talking, even though I don't need any particular Vim knowledge right now, because his voice is just like so soothing, and apparently he gets that response a lot. Okay, it is possible to paste the contents of any register into the current buffer or command line. Blah blah blah. So, wait, what is this nonsense? I just want to know, how do I paste from... How do I copy to or paste from a non-standard buffer? Or a non-default buffer? Yeah, maybe I should actually go into Vim and do... Let me open up a new window for this. Haven't figured out a good way to make this automatically default to my other profile in new tabs here. So I want to do help register, I think. No, that is not what I wanted. I want help registers, plural. No? Oh, no, there we go. Let's see, what's this about? Oh my god, what is all this nonsense? Okay, registers. There are 10 types of registers. The unnamed register, which is just called double quote. So register names... Registers are kind of like named clipboards, essentially. So, like, if you think about in like Mac OS or Windows or something, you by default you just have one clipboard. So every time you do Command C or copy, it overwrites whatever was in the clipboard before, and you then lose it. I know some people use like plugins of various types to do like multiple clipboard support or clipboard history or something like that. I've actually never used one of those because it doesn't happen to me often enough that I find it useful. But here's a Vim specific case where it actually is. So the registers are named by the double quote followed by some symbol, which tells you what name it is. And by default, when you like yank or cut something or copy something in Vim, it puts it into the unnamed register, which is double quote, double quote. So then there's also named register or numbered registers from 0 to 9. The small delete register, which is double quote dash. 26 named registers using alphabetical letters. Read-only registers, alternate... Okay, so there's way more here than I actually need. I think maybe the way Vim fills these registers with text from the yank and delete commands. Thing is, I'm not actually... So basically what I want to do is I want the delete to not overwrite the current paste buffer. So I think I can continue using the paste buffer for this thing, and it's only when I'm doing one of these deletes that I want to... What is this about? Oh, maybe that was the end. So I waited a little bit too long to go learn how to do that. I've already done all of the ones I needed to do through the whole thing. But I think maybe I'll try it just to at least show what I was doing. So let's go back a few steps, and I had like this. So if I have, let's say I have Ruma API exports, I'm going to yank that. So I just hit Y, which puts that selection that I just had into the unnamed register. So now if I press the P key, it's going to paste what's in the register, which is that. However, if I delete these two colons here, the delete is going to move the two colons into the unnamed register over the contents that I don't want to erase. So I think if I do, maybe I'll use one of the name. Maybe I'll use like the 0 register. So I think if I do double quote 0 delete word, that deleted it, and yes, and then if I press P, it still pastes the stuff that I had in the clipboard before. So basically you just type the name of the register that you want the following thing to operate on. So again, I'll do it here. If I were to just do delete word, then it would cut out those two the two colons and clobber my paste buffer. But I'm instead going to do double quote 0 delete word, and that gets rid of it. and then double quote 0 delete word. And then when I get down here, I can just do paste again, and I did not lose that Ruma API double colon exports. Hopefully I'll be able to remember that for the next time that I need to do this. And you know, this is a good example of like why it's a good idea for me to stream this stuff, because I probably would have just brute forced through this and not gone and bothered to look it up if I wasn't thinking about like, oh, I should really be helping the people that are watching this learn this also. So thank you all for guilting me into actually going and looking that up. All right, let's do these last few. Whoops, what did I just do? 0 delete word. And this one I want to paste, and I think that's the last one. Okay. So now if I try to cargo check this again, it should, well actually I guess it won't, it'll still check, but the test will not work because the expanded code is going to be, what? How did that work? Did I not say? Oh, I guess. Wait a minute. How did that work? Because there is no Ruma API exports module at this point. Huh. Am I not? I'm totally... Oh, wait a minute. It didn't... What I actually want... Oh, so if I run cargo test at the top level, it's only... Let's see. Cargo check... If I'm in a workspace, then I need to specify the workspace, I think, because by default, you know how I've got Ruma API at the top level of the repository, and then Ruma API macros is in this subdirectory. I think if I don't specify which package I'm working on, it defaults to the top level one. Yeah, see, look at this. Cargo check all. Check all packages in the workspace. So that's why it worked, is because I wasn't actually checking it. So if I do cargo check all, then this will probably fail. I guess not, because it's still not actually using the... Unless I test it, it's not actually expanding that macro code. So let's try cargo test all. There we go. So now I've done something wrong. So yeah, could not find exports in Ruma API. That's what I was expecting to find. So now what we want to do is go back to source lib, and we're going to have a module here called, I guess I'll do it down here. So pub mod exports, and this is going to be doc hidden. And again, the reason for this is because since we're working across the boundary of two crates, like Ruma API macros needs to be able to refer to items inside Ruma API, but we don't want people who are building software with Ruma API to use this. So it's kind of like a pseudo private API, and the way to get around that is just hide the documentation, so that if someone's like looking at the docs for this, in fact, I can actually just do this right now. I can say, you will not see this. And we can see the difference between the two. If I do a cargo doc on this right now, and then I open up, oh, that's why it was taking so long to load, is this guy does not have HTTPS supported on his site. But yeah, so this is vimcast.org that I was mentioning. Really cool resource. Again, not updated very recently, but there's enough content there that there's a good backlog to go through even at this point. So if you want to either learn some Vim in sort of bite-sized chunks, or you want to just listen to a really relaxing dude's voice, this is a good place to go. So check it out. Yeah, so back to the documentation. So now you can see I have this this exports module that appears, which is where I'm going to re-export all of our third-party crates that we're using from the macro. But I do not want people using the crate to see this when they're exploring the module and learning how to use it. So that's why, I guess I can get rid of these now. That's why I'm going to do doc hidden on it. And then if I build the documentation again, Did it finish that? Oh, that's pretty slow. Boom. Now exports is gone. It's still there and it's still public, but unless you go spelunking through the source code, you're not going to know that. And I can add a note here saying this module is used to support the generated code from Ruma API macros, is not considered part of Ruma API's public API. So that way, in case someone happens to realize that this is here, they're at least warned saying, we are hereby declaring this module to be exempt from semantic versioning, so don't depend on it. Okay, so in here, we now need to re-export the crates that we're using. So I think that's URL and HTTP. And I can't remember what else. So let's just try running the test again and see what else it complains about. Found standard convert infallible, found struct Ruma API error. Okay, so I screwed something up there. What did I... Oh, but interestingly, it seems that URL and HTTP are the only libraries that were necessary there. Or did I do something else crazy here? What have I done? Let's go back to where we were before. What is it complaining about? And this is also something that is not very fun to do, which is debugging macro code. Because if you think about the error that I'm seeing here, it's actually an error from the code that was generated from the expansion of the macro, which is not something that actually appears in my source code. So you can see, like, it gives me a reasonable error message in terms of I know which invocation of the macro generated the code that created this error, but I don't actually see like where in the generated code this particular problem is occurring. So the first thing to do is just, if it's something really obvious, I might be able to just sort of eyeball it. So this is something related to standard convert. So standard convert infallible is the error type when you're using the try from trait from the standard library in a case where the conversion is actually infallible. And let me go find that in the standard library. I want standard. Right. So there's this really wonderful trait that it was this is the trait that it was unstable for a long time, and traditionally Ruma has used a bunch of unstable features, which meant that we were stuck on Rust nightly. But this try from conversion API was the very last unstable feature that we were using. And when this finally got stabilized, I think 2 Rust releases ago, we were finally able to move all of Ruma onto stable Rust. So this is a really nice API. Basically, it's similar to the from and into traits, which you're probably familiar with if you've done any sort of Rust. Basically, this is how you convert from a type T to a type U. If something implements from T, then you can convert from a T into whatever the implementing type is. And the difference with try from is that in the from form, this conversion cannot fail. So it's something that will always succeed. There's always a transformation that can be done successfully. And in the version of try from, this is basically the exact same thing, except that the transformation could possibly fail, in which case it returns a result rather than the implementing type. And so you need to declare an error type in your implementation, saying that if this transformation fails, this is the type of error you can expect. And then the interesting thing here is that if you think about it, you can actually you can think of the from trait, which we were looking at a second ago, you can think of this as a special case of try from, where the error case is actually impossible. Because like you can represent this as this, where the error type is like thing that can never be true, because that code branch will basically never be taken. And so one of the reasons why try from was unstable for so long is that they were trying to see how to integrate this particular use case with another unstable feature that is called the never type, which is an exclamation point as a type. So if you use an exclamation point, like the character exclamation point, in a position in your code where it stands in for a type, it essentially means like this type can never be constructed. And to do so is essentially like undefined or impossible. Like your program will never reach this point. Like if you try to do something that would involve the construction of a never type, I think like your program will just hang or something. It's essentially like a contract saying like this will never ever happen. So what they wanted to do was create a blanket implementation for try from, such that if something implements try from, it also gets a corresponding implementation of from. Oh, sorry, I got that backwards. If something implements from, you know that there's an infallible conversion for it, so it should, in theory, get an automatic implementation of try from where the error type is the never type, meaning that this, like, you can use this API, but the error version of this particular API will never happen, and we guarantee that statically. And the reason that this took so long to stabilize is because there's a lot of sort of tricky details about the never type, and the never type is not ready to be stabilized. So there's been a couple of times where they like almost stabilized it, and in fact, I think it actually was stable for like a week before someone realized a problem was still present with the never type, and they decided to unstabilize try from because of that. So rather than continue to punt on this forever and keep try from feature blocked while waiting for infallible, we're waiting for the never type, they decided to introduce this workaround called infallible, which is this enum right here. And all this is an enum that has no variance. And if you know how enum constructors work in Rust, like essentially what an enum is a list of constructors, all of which can be used to create a value of the parent type. But it's also possible to list an enum that has no variance, which you could also describe as having no constructors, and hence it's actually impossible to create a variant of this enum. So what that means is that if you use this infallible type in place of the never type, it effectively has the same meaning, and that like this infallible or this error case can never occur because it's impossible to construct the value that would need to be returned in that case, and hence you can statically guarantee that case is never going to happen. So this was a kind of a major tangent into like what we're actually doing here, but I think it's a pretty interesting piece of sort of Rust history, and the try from API is also super interesting. And you may have just heard in the background my dog barking. That's, I guess, will be his first appearance on my stream. So he's saying hello to all of you out there on the internet. Okay, so that was a big tangent just explaining what this standard convert infallible thing is. But what that means to me, like it does give me a hint in terms of where this error is coming from, in that I know that this infallible type is used in relation to the try from conversion API. And so I can go back to my code, and let's just look for try from, and let's see what are we doing here where we're expecting try from. So this right here is referring to HTTP, and this actually needs to be re-exported also. So this is oh, wait a minute, no, I can't use my P anymore. I've now overwritten it. So Ruma API exports. This is another one I missed and is perhaps related to why it was complaining. Let's see if that happens otherwise. So we've got... No, I got it right that time. So maybe it was just that. Oh, no, here's another one. I failed. Let's see. Let me go and copy this. Let's go back down to this one, paste that in. I'm missing the double colons. I failed on that too. Okay, so that's what we want. And is there any other place? Oh, so that wrapped back around to the top. So essentially that error message just like because I knew what that type was used for. I knew it was in the Trifont API. That was sort of the first pass of how you debug a procedural macro, in just like using your knowledge of the APIs that you're using to sort of narrow down where in the code base that error might be originating from. If I hadn't, well, actually, I guess we should try this and see if that actually fixes the error before I start saying that it was all that was needed. That seemed to get us a little farther. Oh, maybe not, actually. No URL in external crate. What in the world? Why does it not like that in source lib? Let's go back here for a second. So it did not like... Oh, I wonder if this is a dev dependency. Oh, yeah, that's a dev dependency. Interesting. So why... So let's go back over here. Or I guess... Oh, yeah, let's do that. Source lib. So over here... Where am I using URL? Let's see. Let's do... where am I referring to this? Is this in a test? No, we do use this. So I'm not sure why this is listed only as a development dependency. Oh, I guess it's because the Ruma API itself doesn't depend on this, but Ruma API macros does. So we actually need to move this from a dev dependency to a library dependency, because it actually kind of is part of the public API once the... Well, you know what? But it's only specific to the macros. So in the case where someone builds this library and doesn't use the macros, they don't need URL. So maybe I'll make this a sort of a feature-based... Oh, you know, that also reminds me that up here, this should also be feature-specific. So this is config adder. So just remember that this stuff only is used by the macro. So if we're using Ruma API and not using the macro, then this does not need to be generated at all. So I can use the config adder thing to check whether a particular feature is true. And I think that's done with this syntax, Ruma API macros. Let me see if that works. If I do cargo check no default features, is that going to work? Oh, you know, I should probably also take... Well, I guess... Because I'm not going to know whether... because of the hidden documentation, I'm actually not going to know whether it ended up in the compiled binary. So let me actually get rid of this for a second. It seems like it's working. Wow, that's going off. I'm not sure why that's going... Oh, you know why? I was noticing that, like, compilation seemed slower than usual, and I realized that's because I am streaming what I'm doing and also recording video. So that's probably using a bit more of my CPU than I would be otherwise. It did not like that syntax. I never remember the exact syntax for this. I thought it was config adder. Oh, you know what? It's maybe not. Maybe it's feature comma, like this. Let's try that. And I'm going to do cargo doc, no default features. Let's see if it likes that. That seems more promising. And then similarly over here, I'm going to want to use... I want to move URL and I guess percent encoding also. Where does percent... Oh, so percent encoding used to be part of the URL crate, and it has recently URL version 2.0 was released. Oh, interesting. So URL still... exports percent encoding. Is that right? I thought it only used it internally. Let me take a look at the latest version of docs.rs/URL. So yeah, so URL version 2.0 like just came out a few days ago, and this had some breaking changes, which seems like it. Yeah, it includes so percent encoding is no longer re-exported by URL. So it looks like we're going to need to depend on the percent encoding crate separately. So that's another thing I need to do in updating this. Because you can see this old code right here from the previous version of Ruma API macros. It's using percent encoding that's under the URL namespace, because URL used to include percent encoding. So it looks like I'm going to need to yeah, that's definitely in the implementation. So these are both going to need to be moved as dependencies. Oh, actually, I guess I don't need to list them at all, do I? Otherwise, they would need to be re-exported from Ruma API macros, which I don't think I can do. So I think these just need to be optional dependencies. So let's move these to dependencies .url version is that one, optional is true. And same down here, we're gonna have dependencies percent encoding, and this is changed 2 words, no, space version optional true. A lot of people will do these things like inline by doing like URL equals version blah blah blah. But I kind of like having just like, as much as I can help it, not having sort of these like inline nested composite structures. I think it's a little easier to read. So that's why I have them split out into these separate TOML tables here. Okay, so now we've got these two both set as optional, and they also need to be loaded when Ruma API macros is. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a separate feature called with Ruma API macros, and it's a little confusing the way that the feature stuff works in Rust. I'm not really a major fan of it, because basically, like, all of the dependencies in your project automatically get a feature name if they're optional. So what was happening here before is like when I had just this, it was saying like the library named Ruma API macros, which I have set to be optional up here, is also something that will be compiled by default. But if you use that no default features when you're compiling, then it'll sort of remove this thing from the list of features that it's compiling with. And then it starts to get confusing if you want to group libraries together under a single feature flag, because you can also create like arbitrarily named features. So I can do this like with Ruma API macros, and I can call this like a feature of my own naming, and when that's on, I want it to compile Ruma API macros, and I want it to compile URL, and I want it to compile percent encoding. Let's put them in alphabetical order since I'm anal about that. Percent encoding. And so ideally I just want to call this Ruma API macros, but then it gets confused that it's referring to the library. So that's why I've seen this pattern be used of having the with in front of it to refer to the sort of manually specified feature name. And so then we're going to change this to with Ruma API macros. So when we're using the macros, we're going to include not only the macros, but these two extra dependencies that are only relevant in that case. So that means that down here, back in exports, I can do... Oh, did I ever check whether that actually worked? Let's go back to... Right, so that seems to be working. And then if I go over here, I want to include... I've already got URL, and I need to include pubuse percent encoding. And let's see, is there anything I can... And then I can get rid of... let's see, dev dependencies, Surdy. I think that's also fine for now, although that will probably also have to get moved into the feature flag. But let's just take it one step at a time. So if I now build this again, no default features. Oh, interesting. Unresolved import. And that's because I need to add this here too. That only gets re-exported. Oh, it still doesn't like that. That makes me think that I am not using that config adder thing correctly. Let me go look at I guess I've got Diesel open. I'm guessing there's probably a use of that here. Let's just search Diesel for config adder. Ah, it's feature equals. I never, ever, ever remember that syntax. And the feature is in quotes, is that right? Yes. And then we want the same thing down here. Okay, let's try that again. Oh, what did I do wrong here? I'm missing... Oh, yeah. No, that looks right. What is it complaining about? It doesn't like... Expected a comma? What? Oh, it's not... It's because I'm... Config adder expect is sort of like a test. It's saying if the first argument is true, then run the second argument, and I don't have a second argument in this place, because what I actually want here is just config, not config adder. So this is saying, like, do not compile this unless we have this feature enabled. That's what I wanted. Again, one of those things like, I get it, but I just never remember the syntax for getting it right the first time. Okay, so there we go. We're compiling without the default features. We do not see any of that nonsense. But then if I compile with the default features, and remember I have temporarily shown the documentation, we should get that exports module back. No. Interesting. Why did that not work? That should work with the default features. Ruma API. Oh, no, it's because I need to change the feature name. This needs to be with Ruma API macros. Whew. Okay, let's try that one more time. And I guess I've now actually... Well, I guess I still verified that it doesn't compile when that feature's not enabled, because there was no feature with that name. There we go. So now when the feature is turned on, which is the case by default, we get the macro re-exported, and we get this exports module that has the stuff that we need internally. Okay, so we know that that's working. Now I can hide the documentation again and get rid of that. And now we can also try testing it again, and we should have URL in scope. Okay, still getting errors. Failed to resolve. Could not find exports in Ruma API. Really? Now, why is that? It should be using the default features. We're still getting an error about convert infallible. That is pretty annoying. Oh, actually, several of these points were getting that. What did I do wrong here? Why am I getting that? HTTP request vec. Huh. Well, I guess this is really the peculiar one, is why does it not find exports? Because it is public. Maybe this is something to do with circular dependencies? Ah, man. Oh, you know what? This is why we need to move the test from Ruma API macros into Ruma. Because you see what right now what's happening? Let me close this over here. So under the tests directory, we have... This was previously in the dedicated repository for Ruma API macros, where we were just like invoking it one time to make sure that it at least generates code that compiles. Like we're obviously not like running an actual like client library against this to make sure that it like correctly interacts with a Matrix home server. But we want to at least do sort of like a sanity test and make sure that like there's no really obvious mistakes in the generation of the code that the macro does. Now the problem that is now that they have this kind of weird dependency on each other is that Ruma API macros uses the endpoint trait from Ruma API, and therefore sort of depends on it in that direction. But then, in order to get this export, it also has to have the Ruma API macros feature on in order to get it. So I think we need to move this test into Ruma API's repository, or into Ruma API's crate, rather than the Ruma API macros crate. I think this is probably a good time for me to take a break because I've been doing this for I don't know what time I started. I guess it was about 1:30, so it's been more than 2 hours. I think I'm gonna actually stop here, even though there's more to do, and I will hold off on this and maybe finish it up tomorrow and do this in a couple of parts, just so we don't have like one giant stream that's super long. It's very daunting for people to want to like watch something that long, and also gives me a good reason to kind of like create some breaks and do something else with my day besides just programming all day. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to leave this exactly where I am, and I'm going to pick up on the exact same place later. So for those of you that are actually watching this live, which is several more people than I was expecting like maybe one or two at best. So thank you very much for everyone who's watching this. I hope it was useful or at least interesting. And if not, you can send hate mail to jimmy@jimmyquadra.com, and I will proceed to delete it. So thanks again for watching. I'll probably do another one tomorrow, but I don't guarantee it. So I guess just follow me on Twitter if you have not already. I'm at Jimmy Quadra. I guess I should load that up in case you somehow found out about this through other means. But this is me, and you can watch my Twitter feed for me announcing that I'm going to be streaming, or I guess subscribe to me on Twitch if you use Twitch often enough for that to be useful. Also, if you're I assume you're interested in Matrix if you are doing this. I mean, if you are watching this. So also on the Ruma website, we have a link down at the bottom here to the Matrix room for Ruma. So if you click on this, it's going to take you to a website called Matrix.2, which is kind of like the equivalent of having it launch in your Matrix client, except for the fact that there is no default Matrix client. So this essentially just gives you kind of like a quick explanation to like how do you join the Ruma chat room, depending on like which of these clients you might be using. If you have never used Matrix before and you have no particular like preference for what client to use, and you just kind of want something that works as best as possible, I would have to recommend Riot, which is this top one. Riot is a web-based client that is developed by the same team that creates Matrix. Both the reference implementation of the home server and the specification. So this is really the most full-featured sort of client at this point. It has the best support, the largest sort of community base. The major downside to it is that it's written in fucking JavaScript. So you either have to run it in your web browser, or you have to like run an Electron version of it, which I'm not particularly happy about, but that's the way it is. And again, this is the great thing about Matrix, is that like, unlike Slack, where you have to use the like Electron app or the web version, like you can develop or use another app that is native for your platform. So this is where the openness of it really shines. And even though the ecosystem of that is still very young, and there's like most of these other ones are kind of like either early development or just not as kind of stable or fully featured as Riot is. Like what we're seeing is what will eventually be, a really broad sort of ecosystem, giving the person who wants to chat a lot of choice in how they do that. Anyway, all that is to say, this is how you can figure out how to find a Matrix client and come chat with us in the Ruma chat room on the Matrix network. I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about either the screencast or Matrix or the project, anything else related. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again soon.